In the beginning, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat.
No, Odysseus, let him rack his brains with you and the other captains how to fight
guilty.
Impossible. Trust me.
No one to weep for me, my friends. No wedding song.
Amo verumque cano, Troiae qui primus laboris Italiam
Dante ha fatto il pieno e per gli altri è rimasto ben poco, which means that Dante filled up.
I was the more deceived.
Confess that you were very bad to hurt my feelings.
Cried Candide, I'm through.
Enough. Who are you then?
Part of that force which would do evil evermore, and yet
She was eating a maraschino ice at that precise moment.
There is no
When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous dung beetle.
Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. Or if Sion hill delight thee more, and Siloa's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God, I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Ionian mount, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. And chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, instruct me, for thou knowest. Thou from the first wast present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like satst brooding on the vast abyss, and madest it pregnant. What in me is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. One of the most impressive openings in all of literature, I think, and quite revealing of Miltonic style. It's a kind of Miltonic style in miniature here. You all noticed, of course, that the first sentence is a mere 16 lines long. If you were high school kids, of course, I would make you diagram that sentence. And you know, I'd be curious what you'd find. Where is the main verb? I said that in a kind of silly way, but watch this. Where's the main verb? You notice yourself going far down? Yeah. What is it?
Sing.
Sing. Yeah, exactly. It's the verb is at line 6. The first 5 lines are essentially a statement of the theme of the poem, what this poem will be about. And the main clause is right there, sing, heavenly muse. Is the main verb. And then another 6 lines of description of the muse. So essentially the first 5 lines are statement of theme, line 6 is the verb, and then a description of the muse. It's a very elaborate syntax, isn't it? That is one of the things I think that slows us down as readers, is we really do need to decode. And it has been described by any number of people as a Latinate style. That is both true and not true at the same time. It's Latinate in the sense that he is fond of holding his verbs back. Those of you who've had some Latin will know that verbs frequently are at the very end of sentences. And he is fond of doing that. But it is also typical of a lot of late medieval, early Renaissance Italian poetry to be done this way. So to say that it's Latinate is true, but it's a little misleading to think it only that. Other epics, of course, name the theme in the opening. Menis, the first word of Iliad, we've read Iliad. Wrath, anger, sing goddess, the anger of Peleus' son. Virgil's Aeneid beginning, Arma virumque cano. I sing of arms and the man. And arms and the man are kind of central theme. And Milton, of course, very much aware of the epic tradition, does a similar thing here, of man's first disobedience. Right away, we see who the hero is. I'm making my eyebrows dance. I hope this is not too subtle for you. Man's first disobedience. And the question, of course, is, does that include woman? Is woman man? You know, obviously he's using man in that generic sense. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree. And that fruit, of course, is Eve's apple, but it might also be the consequences of eating it, right? We talk about the fruits of our labor. Am I clear what I'm doing here? Just right away in the opening lines, you can see the layers of meaning coming to the attentive reader. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste, interesting adjective, isn't it? Mortal taste. That's an odd yoking of adjective to noun. How many times have you described taste as mortal in your experience? You know? But you know exactly what he means because it introduces death, whose mortal taste brought death into the world.
But weren't they immortal at that time in Eden? Adam and Eve?
Precisely, that's the point. That's the point. It's the eating of the fruit that introduces mortality and death into the world. So that's why the taste is mortal. Yeah. And all our woe. That's a classically traditional view of Eden, right? That's that notion of it once was a wonderful place because we didn't have any woe. There was no pain. And it's almost as if we looked at Eden in terms of the pleasure-pain principle, that because there was no pain, it therefore was a good place. And I think the epic questions that, doesn't it? Because I do think you want to wonder whether Adam and Eve are better in a moral sense after the fall than before. Adam will question this in Book 12. Adam, after he hears the instructions from Michael, and after he's told of the Felix Culpa, after he's told of the Christ figure and all that the Christ figure represents, he will wonder how to view his own disobedience and how to view his own sin. He's confused. He doesn't know whether to be happy about it or sad about it. And it's interesting that that's pretty much our condition as well. Traditionally, one bemoans the loss of Eden, but goodness, since the Renaissance, one questions whether it was the inevitable and indeed the good thing to do. I should tell you that the Gnostic, we have a real problem in this epic, because what causes the fall is knowledge. And it is quite clear in the traditional scheme of things that knowledge is a bad thing. Knowledge leads to suffering. Knowledge leads to unhappiness. We're better off in our innocence. Essentially what this epic is all about is the trip that we all make, and we usually make repeatedly during the course of our lives. We all fall, and the fall here is the movement from innocence to experience. What Adam and Eve gain is not simply abstract knowledge. They gain experiential knowledge, the kind of experience that one gains in the world. You all with me so far? So the movement that the epic charts is the same movement really that Genesis 3 charts. Innocence, experience. And are we to posit that innocence is a better state for man and woman than experience? What moves us from innocence to experience is some event. Something happens in the world. We're very fond of this myth. It takes a variety of forms. Americans particularly love it, I should tell you. Love this myth. Huck Finn, our great American novel, right, is a trip from innocence to experience. It's a journey. Huck goes on a journey, right, down the river. What's a modern analog? we always had the cowboy who rides, you know, from point A to point B and experiences a loss of innocence and gains experience. Easy Rider, one of my favorite films from the 60s, right? You all remember that? Where we just trade in the horse for a motorcycle, you know, and it's the same thing. Off they go on the road, you know, from innocence to experience. Experience is knowing something today that you didn't know yesterday, and you're changed by it. You have lost something, paradise, according to this epic, but you've gained something in its place. And the question for us as moderns, I suppose, is there is no going back to the womb. There's no going back to paradise, right? Our condition is the condition of fallen Adam and Eve. We live in a post-lapsarian world. And the question then becomes, given that as our premise, how are we to live? Are we to long for a time of paradise as presented in this epic, paradise as a place? Or are we to recreate paradise in our lives? And if so, how do we do it? That, I think, is what this epic is all about. And that's pretty huge stuff. That's biting off the big issues. How is one to live? And Milton is not shy at all in telling you exactly how to do it. But one of the problematic things in the epic, especially from a man as learned as Milton is the view of knowledge. Do we all know that knowledge is a dangerous thing? So what are we going to do about it? You understand? You know, I mean, there are all sorts of responses to this question. You know, one response to the question is, let's sit under a tree and meditate. You know, and you know that'll be our avenue into
Newton's
truth.
apple sitting under the
Gonna hit
tree
you on the
created
head.
something.
Yeah, gonna bop you on the head and remind you of physical law. Yeah, yeah. If we're Amish, we're going to say, oh, education's fine in our schools up to a certain point, and then boom, that's it. Because the wider world is a threat. Knowledge is a threat to the stability. Milton talks in this epic, Phyllis, I'll get to it in just a second because I want to finish the idea. Milton talks in this epic about having Michael say to Adam, be lowly wise. Interesting line, isn't it? Be lowly wise. There are all sorts of things that don't teach you how to be a better human being. They're just mindless speculation. You know, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? You know, medieval scholasticism, you know, which just ties you up in knots, into logical knots, and doesn't teach you how to live.
27.
Huh?
I was just answering the question about the angels on the head.
Oh, 27. I walked right into that. I didn't. Thank you. I've often wondered.
It adds up to 9.
Yes, it's a multiple of 9.
I think part of the problem of seeing the fall as a descent, though, and it's
Yes.
part of the metaphor
Yes.
that is now so ingrained. I prefer to look at it at the whole struggle and taking risk as going to bat. Because if you see it in a lateral, then you are at home or Eden, and you take the chance of getting a run, a single, a double, a triple, or an entire run,
Right.
and
Or striking out.
or striking out,
Yeah.
and you can't just do nothing.
You can't take you can't refuse your turn at bat.
But both
Yeah.
are home,
Mm-hmm.
and so you either take it or you lose out
Yes.
in
Yeah.
the experience.
Yeah. See, I think good for you. I think if we have to rethink the metaphor, it seems to me. I really am troubled by the notion of a fall. One understands it because to fall is to hurt oneself. Innocence, do you know that innocence in its Latin form means uninjured? Isn't that fascinating? Uninjured. It's as if the normal state of affairs is to be injured, and it's a curious negative definition. It means to be uninjured. And the fall is a useful metaphor in the sense that the movement from innocence to experience usually does involve some pain. Falling hurts, you know, but it doesn't kill, you know. It hurts. It could, yes, it could. But you understand what I'm saying. It's a milder form of pain, the fall. Yeah. So it does suggest that the movement from innocence to experience does involve some pain, and I think rightfully so. But the more interesting question is, now what? Now that you've fallen, now what? And your suggestion is you must get up again. You must dust yourself off and get up again.
Do you know the original etymology, say biblically, the description of what we now call the fall?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what's interesting is the Gnostic Gospels. You've all heard of the Gnostic Gospels. The Gnostic Gospels and the old Hebrew commentaries, sin is first. The word sin in the old Hebrew commentaries is not used until Cain and Abel. You all hear what I just said? It's not used until chapter 4 of Genesis. It's not used in chapter 3. It's the Christian gloss that made Adam and Eve sinful. What they suggested, what they saw, was that this was the essential journey and that it was not any kind of moral coloration, that we all act out the Adam and Eve drama in our lives, and it's the essential human condition. The Gnostic Gospels did not see Adam and Eve's fall as sinful either. They did not see it as a fall in our traditional sense of the term. It's later commentary that did that. That's kind of fascinating. That's the best I can do for you, though, Phyllis. I can't. You've just hit the limits of my knowledge about that. Yeah.
Very interesting. Now I know why I object to being saddled with the original sin.
Yes.
Because I don't believe it.
Yes.
And why wouldn't God want us to have knowledge? I mean, I certainly don't think that God thought man would be another God with knowledge. I really think that I know we talked about predestination, but I think that this was meant to be, and that man should have knowledge and should lose his innocence.
Well, the obvious response to that is man will have knowledge.
Yes.
You know, so the should-haves and would-haves at this point are kind of, you know, and it is the condition to have it and to seek it. What's interesting for Milton is what you seek, why, and what you're going to do with it. You hear? Those are important. Those become important. Knowledge for knowledge's sake, not Miltonic. Knowledge will allow you to live a better, more moral life. That's useful. That's useful knowledge. You'll see, if you read the middle books of Paradise Lost, you'll see Adam speculating about the planets. He wants to know all about astronomy, and he wants to know how the planets work. And it's a kind of, you know, he's wouldn't you? You know, you're looking up and seeing all this stuff and going, wow, what's going on up there? How does that work? Are there beings up there? You know, all those normal kinds of questions. And Raphael has to remind him, look, this stuff was put out of your reach. This is really not for you to ask. Don't have your eyes pointing up into the cosmos. Have your eyes pointing down here, how you live your life here. That's what your realm of knowledge is. You all hear my point. So keep yourself focused on how you live your life and be careful of idle speculation. It's interesting too that in Book 1, the fallen angels on the burning lake break up into groups. They kind of group themselves, and there's a kind of warrior group that are over here writing epic. They're singing of their battle in heaven. It's just like an epic is growing up. And over here are the philosophers. And Milton talks about them. Here, let me find the line, and I'll read it to you. Now, having said that, I won't be able to find it. All right, I'm wasting too much time. I'm not finding it right away, but they're sitting down and they're talking about predestination, fate, free will, fixed free will, foreknowledge. You understand what I'm doing? All of this essentially endless speculation that is getting them absolutely nowhere because their premises are flawed. He's getting his satiric barb in at those philosophers who, because their premises are flawed, that is, they don't recognize their proper relationship to the deity, speculate off on all of these different things, and it has nothing to do with how one lives one's life.
We do that now.
We all do it, of course.
Billions of dollars for, which, you know, it's fine as long as the primary focus isn't sacrificed for it.
Sure.
But I think Raphael's advice is probably still current.
Be lowly wise. It's an extraordinary concept. He's going to repeat it again in Book 12. We'll take a look at it before this hour is over.
Fringe into God's realm. Don't stay in your own world.
That's essentially what he's saying. Yes, essentially, if I can boil it down to a nutshell, Raphael is saying that God has left any number of things quite beyond human ken. How often have you seen this term? This notion that there are things simply beyond the human ability to understand. Of course, science, well, you got to understand that Milton is living in an age where science is just being born. This is a great age of science. And so, as you say, we do that today, and you could point to any number of to us seemingly odd studies that are going on. That was going on in Milton's time, really for the first time. You have Harvey's circulation of blood. You know, you have Francis Bacon in the earlier part of the century really introducing the scientific method into England. And it's an exciting time of science, and undoubtedly Milton is seeing a potential threat here.
Well, it is an exciting time for science now. I mean, it sounds like it always has been. You know, it's just been fleshing out like a lot of things. But why is it so hard for us to turn the science or the finances, whatever, the interest, to bettering our lives, you know, to the human condition, how we do that? That just simply hasn't. Well, there have been places when it's been a priority. But
yeah, and there are any number of people who will tell you, be careful of endorsing only utilitarian knowledge, because what is...
I wasn't meaning to do that, because our lives amount to a lot more than just utilitarian things.
Yes.
That's part of it. That's part of the problem, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
As well as part of the reward
exactly
for being
right.
human.
Exactly right. That is exactly right. We are cursed or blessed, depending on your point of view, with that extraordinary imagination that can come up with those questions, and as soon as the questions are framed, guaranteed we will try to pursue answers to those questions.
But are we not forgetting that the real original sin was disobedience? It wasn't the tree of knowledge. In fact, from what this is my idea, but I think the tree of knowledge was given as equipment to face this world. Now that man had fallen, they needed that knowledge in order to get through the world, because God knew what man was going to come up against. But the thing was, here was a God, he created a man. Didn't that man owe him something like mere disobedience, mere obedience, which they did not follow through, and neither did Satan?
Perhaps. I mean, I don't want to get into the shoals of theology here, because we can get into trouble.
Explain why we have this knowledge and we never get anywhere toward in our morality.
And on the other hand, you wonder what kind of a God it is who would create a garden, create human beings with the nature that they have, and then put them in a situation where it would be quite impossible for them to have done otherwise than what they did, and then punish them for it. This was, from Empson's point of view, let me just continue the idea. This is one trend in Milton scholarship, that the real tyrant, the real evil figure in this epic is not Satan at all. It's God who would do such a thing, who would create such a situation, knowing that man would fail, and punish him for that.
Milton said he was lonesome. God was lonesome. He said that was why he would do it, because he was lonesome too.
That's a pretty scary notion too. But let's just let's not get into the shoals of that kind of theology.
26 is very telling and justify the ways of God to men.
That's good.
This whole epic, in a way, is justifying a lot of God.
Precisely. That is what his purpose was, to be sure. Yep.
And God was lonely.
Barbara?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting and compelling arguments that Satan gives to Eve is that if God is just, then nothing bad can happen to you, because why would a just God let something bad happen to a good person? And of course, there's Job's dilemma again, too. And I think she really buys into this. I think it's a very compelling argument.
That's countered, though, by Rosemary. I'm sorry, Rosemary. Argument that this is a very legalistic God, and God laid down the law that you will not eat of this tree. They eat of the tree, they disobeyed, therefore they are punished. It's an airtight logic.
That's not free will. And we don't know how long Adam and Eve were in that garden before, evidently too, Eve and Adam had made any number of choices that didn't have these kinds of unfortunate results. So that might have made her even more responsive to that kind of temptation. But it was all there all the time, just like it's all there for us too. And the freedom of free will, and the scary part is that any choice can have any.
You don't know the consequences.
No, you don't know
We've been seeing that all term, haven't we?
Well, sometimes
of choices being made, and we just don't know the energies they release.
Or we don't choose to see them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wonder how many things people really do that they know it's wrong and they do it anyway.
Yeah, not often.
No.
Yeah, right. Not often.
You dress it up a little bit, and you rationalize it, and.
That's the pride of man, and that's the first that's going to go into hell, they say. Not Dante's hell.
Now we have, God is sitting right over here now.
Man's pride is the word. That is the hinge. Man's pride.
Okay, let me do this, Barbara.
Sometimes the way I think of this story is like we begin with innocence, and it's a land of paradise, and then we meet all these problems of life and tackle them, and then when we do, it becomes paradise again, but only a sweeter, more fruitful paradise.
Well, that's what's implied, frankly, at the end of this epic when Michael talks about Adam possessing a paradise happier far than the paradise they left behind. And I think what Milton is suggesting is one of those, what the church used to call heresies, which is that heaven and hell are not so much physical places, although they are useful for a narrative to have them as physical places, but they really are states of mind. They're psychological states. As Satan will say any number of times during the course of the epic, wherever I go is hell. Myself am hell. It's a marvelous 3 words. Myself am hell. And so, as we were saying in the other hour, because of this intellectual state, and then call it what you will, call it pride, call it egotism, call it fear, whatever it is that's motivating him, or all of these things, as if we could sort them out. Whatever is motivating him, even in heaven, heaven is a hell for him. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven, is what Satan says. It's a great line, isn't it? That is one powerful line. The notion of hierarchy is troublesome to Satan, because it means he must be below something. He doesn't see himself, he's at the second rung of the ladder, and instead of looking down, he's looking up, That's a cheap metaphor, but you understand my point. So wherever he goes, when he comes to paradise, the first words out of his mouth are, "Oh, hell." When he sees Adam and Eve behaving admirably, please notice throughout Book 9, and you would have noticed it through the middle books as well, they're always hand in hand. It is a dramatic moment in the epic when they go their separate ways. That's the first step toward their fall. Remember, the garden grows luxuriant, and Eve suggests that they divide their labors. Perfectly rational thing to do, right? Remember, this is starting to overgrow with weeds, and they, instead of working side by side, when they're working side by side, they stop and smile at one another, and then they start talking. And remember how she talks about that? And so it's better for them to divide their labors.
But before that, she said, if this be our condition, thus to dwell in narrow circuit. I think Eve felt confined.
Sure.
Too.
Oh, sure. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So she says, let's, so the hands break apart. And that's a dramatic moment in the epic. They're no longer handed. They are alone in the worst sense of that term for the temptation. But anyway, I was making the point that Satan comes down and sees this, of course, sees them kissing. And, well, when he first sees Eve, it's like, ooh, hubba, hubba, you know? Who is this? You know, and he's filled with all sorts of lust and passion, and then ultimately rage that God would create so noble a character as the human being. Wherever he goes is hell. So you as readers read this thing, and you quickly work out that paradise isn't a place. Paradise is a way of viewing the world. It's a way of being in the world. And hell is not so much a place. Hell is also a way of being in the world and looking at the world. And we realize that for Adam and Eve, paradise isn't a place. It's a way of being in the world and a way of looking at the world. And it is altogether possible that as they make their way out of paradise, don't miss the, out of the physical place, they carry within them a paradise happier far in terms of the epic. And the question for us is now, what do they have? You see, and that's where you get shortchanged, I'm afraid, in your anthology, because you miss a lot of the detail. You miss a lot of the instruction by Michael in books 11 and 12, which teaches them to be lowly wise and what virtues they need. What they need, of course, is to be more like Eve after the fall. Eve, forsake me not thus, Adam. Eve that can break through Adam's ego. I talked about it in talking to Rachel Faulkner. You remember my talking, I used the expression, he has himself cloaked in anger, and she kind of liked that. Bless her soul. But you understand what I mean. He's so wrapped up in his anger that he can't reach out to anybody else. And it's Eve who can reach out and touch someone to, sorry, but yeah, right, yeah. But I mean, that's really an important moment.
Well, don't you think that we find our paradise most frequently when we've just come through something that's really terrible?
Sure.
And
if we come through it, yes. If you turn it into a positive, yeah, sure. Yeah.
It is all around us.
See, that's why I said to you back when we did Genesis 3, I prefer to think of this as a rise instead of a fall. I think it's a much more meaningful metaphor. But the fall suggests we not see the positive in it.
Actually, the geography is the same in the three places. The rivers, there are 4 rivers.
Yes.
And so, apart from the details of each so-called place, which are really, I guess, could be left to perception. One sees them or one doesn't see them, or is conscious of them or not conscious of them, corroborates the concept that feeling of heaven, hell, or
nice point. Yeah, nice point. Yeah, and indeed, the action of the epic also occurs on all 3 levels, if you think about it. And by that I mean there's a kind of trinity. There's a dual trinity at work in the battlefield of Adam and Eve's heart and soul. There is the heavenly trinity of God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, right? There's also an infernal trinity. Satan, sin, and death. Good for you. Satan, sin, and death. And remember, like the relationship between the Son and the Father and the Holy Spirit and the Father, Satan, sin, and death are all of the same person. Sin sprung whole from Satan's head, was his daughter. He then rapes his daughter, and death is born. All right? So you've got these 2 trinities at work. And the interesting struggle is we have Adam and Eve in paradise. Who's going to make up the trinity? Who's going to be the third? Is it going to be Satan, or is it going to be Christ? And that's the interesting struggle that goes on in this epic. Yes. Adam and Eve must come together to make that third member of the Trinity possible. I can't stress this enough. If they don't come together, if they stay the way Adam wants them to stay after the fall, guess who wins? Precisely. So who is it that makes Christ possible? Who is it that makes love possible? Who is it that makes that creative future possible? It's Eve. Eve reaching out in her vulnerability, reaching out and saying, "Forsake me not thus, Adam." It's an extraordinary moment in the epic. That's the real central action, it seems to me, in the epic. That's what I think Rachel Faulkner was suggesting. Speaking of whom, let's hear what else she had to say. I chatted with her some more. Just really one of the highlights of my England trip. Let's take a look at the monitor and see Rachel Faulkner. Each of us could write our own story of the fall, of our own fall, of our movement from innocence to experience. What's interesting to me in Paradise Lost is that the central event that makes that movement from innocence to experience is knowledge. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me about that? Knowledge as something dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. I think that it does come up in the temptation scene precisely, and Satan says, how can you possibly know what evil is and avoid it unless you know it, unless you have experience of it? And that's logically and theologically a fallacy, because Eve is supposed to recognize, or the reader is supposed to recognize, no, you can have knowledge about something without knowing it, as in knowing it through experience. That's maybe the theological answer that Eve should have seen. But in terms of ourselves as fallen readers, and in terms of Eve as someone who wants to seek out conflict, it's really a very much more difficult point to challenge. It's actually the argument that Milton uses himself in Areopagitica. He says it's the doom that we have fallen into since the fall, to know our good by evil. And there he's discussing why all sorts of books should be printed, of all kinds, seditious books and so on. His idea is that we need to explore all of the options before being able to see what truth is. And this is what Eve wants to do in Book 9. I think a very laudable point to fall on. It is the reason for the fall, but I think it's also in part the reason for her recovery, and possibly for our recovery. That is, you're not looking to get yourself out of a place of conflict by choosing between a black and a white, a right and a wrong. You are, in a way, trying to test out your knowledge against things that you don't know. You're sort of leaving the sides of yourselves, if you think spatially, the sides of yourself open to conflict with other people, to other people's voices and dialogues. This is why she gets interested by what the serpent is saying. She's actually intrigued by his ideas, not by flattery or appetite or these things. So I think that's the dangerous point, but that's also what Milton most admires in his characters. And in a way, it's the space that we have to go through. Having read this poem, you need to have these spaces around yourself open to enter into this conflict.
I wonder why we refer to this experience as the fall, since it's an expression of essential human nature, and since its result is so positive, one wonders why we don't call it a rise rather than a fall.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it probably is a rise, actually, and it must have been very distressing for Milton to have the reaction to his poem, one of his good friends saying, well, that's Paradise Lost, what about Paradise Regained? Because I think that Paradise Regained is very strongly in that poem as well. You have the rising movement afterwards, but the fall in itself is a rise. This is where Adam and Eve become real people, with all of their complexities. This is, I think, the point of engagement where we can grow. Yes, I would say that that's one of the spatial things that happens that's strange in Paradise Lost. Falls don't actually fall, they get suspended, or else they change directions.
All of us at some time are kicked out of the garden. We experience what Adam and Eve experience. Some would tell you that it happens in the birth process when we are, quite against our will, if we have a will in the womb, expelled from the womb into a backside slapping world. We soon discover that the world lacks coherence, that all sorts of things can render life meaningless. We discover the shortcomings of our parents. We can tell any number of stories of expulsion from the garden. How does that work for you in Paradise Lost? Are we seeing the kind of Ur trip out of the garden here?
Yes, Ur trip, I like that. Well, yes, I think that we do have to live through Paradise Lost, as you say. It corresponds very much to our own low points and how to get out of that. I suppose what Paradise Lost does for me is it shows me the point at which you can recover from these moments of fall, or how you begin to look for an answer, and that the strength comes somehow, I'm not sure how to explain it, but from inside Eve, and it's an ability to look outwards when everything in your experience is looking inwards. Somehow she manages to turn around and says, "Forsake me not thus, Adam," and she's looking out again. That's the kind of strength that the poem offers that I think we have to find somehow.
So what's difficult for all of us after we're expelled from the garden is how we live life without imbibing its bitterness, how we go on, how we get older and wiser rather than older and more bitter. And Milton, I think, addresses that rather strongly in the last 3 books of Paradise Lost. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I think that he is extremely confrontational. He likes a good fight, and part of that is actually an extraordinary open-mindedness, a willingness and wanting to hear other people's opinions. So as an extension of that, I think that the bitterness all gets directed outwards. I wouldn't say that he's a saint by any means, but the energy is always engaging with someone else, not allowing it to grow inwards and grow bitter in that way, but to turn it outwards, direct it at the next grand antagonist, you know.
Rachel Faulkner, she was just a delight to talk to. She went to Yale. I'll tell you a little background about her. She was a classics major at Yale, and then went over to Oxford and took her PhD. And we had a very interesting chat. She talked, after she took her PhD, on the basis of being a Miltonist and reading so much about Milton and that can't praise a fugitive in cloistered virtue. She took a PhD in '89, which is when Eastern Europe was starting to free itself, and she went to Prague and decided to, it's a remarkable story, and decided to teach in Prague for several years because that was where the action was. And she wanted to be in the world, committing herself to that change. Isn't that remarkable? Now she's obviously at the University of Sheffield. Yes, Barbara.
I was thinking about Eve's not being shown the vision of the future and of the earth.
Yeah.
And I wonder why Milton or the angel did not allow her to see the vision. She has demonstrated her independence, and she has demonstrated her wisdom in looking at the future. And I wonder, is she being punished? Is she being further punished by not showing? And if she isn't being punished, then they don't give her the mentality to be able to cope with what is shown to Adam.
Yeah, it's just an excellent point you just made, and I think, quite frankly, it's the latter. It's in his strict sense of the proper relation between the sexes, it is the male who is dominant. It is the male who is the head, and Michael's appeal is to Adam, as you say, not to Eve. She does not partake of that vision. Several times during the course of the epic, Milton does indeed say that obeying one's husband is the thing that the woman should do. We blanch, I mean, when we read it today. I mean, we absolutely blanch. But it was strict. Even for his day, it was a little strict, but only a little strict. People are still, you don't need me to tell you, people are still turning to biblical precedents to try to uphold that old orthodoxy. You know that. If you're coming out of a Jewish tradition, you know that better than most. There are synagogues where women do not sit, right, in the main floor. I mean, this is part of the culture, and heck, we've been fighting it only for the last 200 years or so. That's, I mean, in terms, I'm laughing, but in terms of human history, that's the fight's still a long way to go, right? And the culture mitigates against it, doesn't it? Yeah.
But Eve didn't want to share the knowledge with Adam. She wanted to retain a little bit of superiority. She dwelt on that.
Well, of course, but isn't that typical of anyone who's been in a captive class? I mean, remember Eve and 9 debating, should I tell him or maybe not, and then I will have the upper hand. Sure, understandable, perfectly human. Yeah.
How about looking at it from this point of view?
Mm-hmm.
How about if they decided that Adam needed this to reassure him about his future, but they knew that she was so well grounded in what her function was, she didn't need that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
I mean, women are basically very practical.
Yeah.
It's up to them to get their children to survive, make sure that the husbands provide. I mean, and no
That's an
matter
interesting
words
point.
or anything,
Yeah.
but I feel that it would have been more or less wasted on her.
Yeah.
She didn't need it.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah. It was Adam, wasn't it, who needed Eve in Book 9? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a nice point. Peter?
In the video, there was a reference to an trip.
Oh, yes. I should have explained that, yes. There's a funny joke going around the studios that the fellow who's doing the transcript for me saw that Ur trip and thought it was O-R and wrote, what the hell is an Ur trip? I meant Ur, as in the German U-R, which is the first and most perfect of its kind. So the Ur trip out of the garden is the Genesis 3 story is the first and most perfect of its kind, of this innocence to experience kind of story. Yeah. That's all I meant by it. It's perfect of its kind and the first. Yeah.
In spite of Adam being allowed to see the future, he still bemoans and bemoans. Michael tells him that it's no small thing that you are given earth.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And also that he bemoans the fact that he will no longer see God's face, and Michael has to tell him, well, God will be everywhere, and you can make a paradise on earth. So I mean, he has to be shown the way.
Yes, he does indeed. He has to be instructed. I want to pick up on that. I want to actually read from that because you're right. Michael ends his instructions with a vision of the Last Judgment. And just as you say, he says, for then the earth shall all be paradise, far happier place than this of Eden, and far happier days. And Adam's response to that is quite remarkable as he looks back to what he and Adam and Eve have done after he sees this vision of the future, ending ultimately in a last judgment where rewards and punishments will be doled out and earth will become a paradise. It says, "Oh goodness infinite, goodness immense, that all this good of evil shall produce, and evil turn to good." Remember, that's been promised right from the proem all the way through the poem. "More wonderful than that which by creation first brought forth light out of darkness. Full of doubt I stand," says Adam, "whether I should repent me now of sin by me done and occasioned, or rejoice much more that much more good thereof shall spring, to God more glory, more goodwill to men from God, and over wrath grace shall abound." You hear Adam wondering, wow, this is all going to turn to such good. I wonder if I really did sin. I wonder if I really did something bad. Let me just finish the idea. And so then Michael gives him a further view of the future, and we see corrupt clergy and this, that, and the other thing. And then finally, Adam says, greatly instructed, I shall hence depart, greatly in peace of thought. And I want you to listen to that. Greatly in peace of thought, and have my fill of knowledge what this vessel can contain. Very interesting. You hear the condition? He'll have his fill of knowledge what this vessel can contain, suggesting there are limitations. Beyond which was my folly to aspire. This is a business about knowledge again, and folly to aspire beyond the reach. Henceforth I learn that to obey is best, and love with fear the only God. To walk as in his presence, ever to observe his providence, and on him soul depend, and he goes on with this sort of thing, talking about obedience, love, meekness, and fortitude as being the qualities of character that are going to be essential in the post-lapsarian world. Now, listen to those. Those are meekness, not dominate the other. Meekness suggests quite the opposite, doesn't it? These are qualities that one does not see in Michael's vision of the future. One does not see love and meekness and obedience. So then Michael concludes, this having learnt, thou hast attained the sum of wisdom. Hope no higher, though all the stars thou knewest by name, and all the ethereal powers, all secrets of the deep, all nature's works, or works of God in heaven, air, earth, or sea, and all the riches of this world enjoyest, and all the rule of one empire. You hear Milton kind of saying, you can know all that stuff, and it's not going to do you a whit of good. It's a little slam, I think, on science. Only add deeds to thy knowledge. Everybody hear that? All right? Deeds to thy knowledge. Answerable. Add faith, add virtue, patience, temperance, add love, by name to come called charity, the soul of all the rest. Then wilt thou not be loath to leave this paradise, but shalt possess a paradise within thee, happier far. You all get see what we've been talking about? So this notion that how should we put this? We are all put in this epic in the position of being God. That is, we all have within our ability, or in our powers, the ability to create heaven and hell. You with me? You can do that. But you must choose to do it. You must live a conscious life, which will allow you to do that. It is not, Milton does not suggest it's easy. There's every reason in the world, especially Rachel Faulkner talked about Milton admiring his Adam and Eve. And I thought that was really very well put. I think he admires them because Adam, after given this vision of history in books 11 and 12, is willing to go on. And it's extraordinary because, believe me, the vision of human history one sees in 11 and 12 is not rosy. It's war and murder and subjugation and dominance and this, that, and the other thing. And what this epic is suggesting is all those old models be replaced by something else. And it's within your power to do that if you're willing to do it. You can create a heaven.
But look at...
Yeah.
No, but, even though he had this vision, he really had no choice because, they contemplated suicide, they contemplated all the alternatives, and they decided that there was no way that they could go against the will of God in continuing down this path of life.
Yeah, good for you. They really do debate suicide quite seriously. Adam does it quite seriously. It's very much like Hamlet. I mean, it's the same speech almost, isn't it? Remember when he goes, "Oh my goodness, I may not be able to escape punishment even in death. So I must go on." He really does bottom out. And that begins the moral regeneration, actually. Yeah. Ada?
Earlier, you said something about Eve not receiving the same vision, and I wanted to double check it, and so I turned back, and I didn't get that impression. I got the impression they both got the message, but in two different ways.
Yeah.
Because it says that she tells Adam when he returns to her that God is also in sleep and dreams advice. She knew where he had been and knew what he had done and to whom he was talking in the message. So they both got the same.
But her point is well taken. The delivery of the message is really quite different.
But it makes sense. Like somebody else said over here, as women, we know things about guys without being told. I mean,
get out of here! Would you stop? Would you stop?
So you know,
get out of here! Get out of here!
But actually, God told Adam about the tree. It didn't tell Eve. He told Adam, and Adam told Eve.
Milton does the same thing in the Raphael. He has Eve off stage, and Raphael gives his lessons to Adam straight on. Well, I'll tell you, if I were you, I would not show my face in the nation after saying stuff like this. This is leaving the studio, you know. So this epic really does, as he promised in the poem. We started in those first 26 lines, and I'm afraid we got sidetracked. But remember, in the first 26 lines, he talked about going beyond Homer and Virgil and Tasso and Ariosto. And he talked about soaring above and doing things yet unattempted in prose and rhyme. And he really does, in this epic, cut to the essential question, the essential human question confronting us, which is how one lives in a fallen world. And it's tough. And there's no roadmap. I mean, and the ending is perfect, isn't it? I mean, if you look at, again, since we're reading from the work, look at the end of it. I mean, it's just extraordinary. Look who gets the last word. I'm not implying any kind of gender thing here. Go easy on me now, all right? I'm not implying anything. But at line 6:15, but now lead on, Eve says to Adam. Of course, you know, you're not. Some of you will not be too thrilled with that subservient position to Adam. In me is no delay. With thee to go is to stay here. Without thee here to stay is to go hence unwilling. That's a beautiful expression of love, isn't it? Thou to me art all things under heaven, all places thou. It's very interesting how place so often in Milton becomes a psychological thing, a mental state rather than a physical place. Who for my wilful crime art banished hence, this further consolation yet secure I carry hence, though all by me is lost, meaning paradise. Such favor I unworthy am vouchsafed. By me the promised seed shall all restore. That's a real note of hope. That word seed is repeatedly mentioned in Book 12, and it's symbolic because that is her real blessing, isn't it? To use an old-fashioned word, is that she is the source of the creative future, and so that expression of Eve's faith is just beautifully expressed by Milton.
It is wantonly overlooked.
Yes, it is.
So much is made, in fact, in the Catholic Church for priesthood.
Yes.
And so, just for one example.
Yes.
And God, Christ was a man.
That's right.
You know, well, big deal in one sense that God, being God, could have put this person here without a navel. Okay, didn't have to, could have been still a man or a woman, but not a woman born. And did not do that. I mean, reaffirming, what if this woman-born creature had been female? What would that say about the male sex? So both sexes were very germane.
Yes.